Imagine you're a kid sitting down on a crisp, sunny Saturday morning at 7 a.m., waiting for your favorite show to come on. You got all your cute little knickknacks and snacks along with you, along with your favorite blanket you have with you every Saturday morning to watch with the show. You then turn on the TV and change it to your favorite channel, patiently waiting for the current show to go off so your favorite show of all time can play. You then count down in your head from 5. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And when you hit 1, you're so excited because you know after that 1 second, you will finally get to see a new episode of your favorite show of all time. But then it comes on and they play a rerun. You're now in a panic and in shock, finally coming to the realization that these fuckers done canceled my show! They didn't give me a heads up or a call or a 2 weeks notice notifying me about the sudden and drastic change. You're then left deeply saddened and scarred for life, not knowing how the ending of Teen Titans will go. Then you cry, kinda like, wah, no, my fave, ah. But nobody cares because you're a kid and, life moves on. But now I'm an adult. I'm a fully legalized, grown-ass individual. And sadly, this is still happening to me. Because shows are getting canceled left and right without rhyme or reason. And it sucks so much because, I like those shows. So instead of crying about it alone, I'm going to cry about it with you guys and talk about... This video isn't going to be like my usual videos where I do a full deep dive on a certain series in full detail, but more so as the title implies. I'm going to be talking about a few cancelled shows and the things that I love about them because I actually do want you guys to watch these shows on your own if you haven't already. It probably won't bring these shows back from cancellation, unfortunately, but I do believe that every show on this list does deserve some amount of praise, so yeah, go watch those. Somebody's orders. When Inside Job first released, I've seen a good chunk of people compare it to Rick and Morty, and I honestly don't know why. Like, I get it, they're both adult cartoons and have mad scientists, but that's kind of where the similarities end. Inside Job follows a sleep-deprived middle-aged woman named Reagan, where she sorta kinda runs an underground organization called Cognito Inc. that secretly controls the world while creating, dismissing, and cultivating conspiracies. Things like the moon landing, cloning, Bigfoot, flat earth, lizard people, and the JFK assassination. Yeah, there's no punchline there. That's literally a plot point in the series. First and foremost, I want to say that Inside Job does a really good job at balancing humor and drama in a natural way that doesn't feel too forced. Characters naturally progress in a believable and realistic way in accordance to their dynamics with one another and the world around them. Like Reagan and her father, Rand Ridley, who is also a super genius. This guy is like a slightly more sober Rick Sanchez, which is not really saying much. This guy is a slimy, greasy-ass individual, and it doesn't really help that he's a horrible father and an even worse husband. And his relationship with Reagan definitely had a negative impact on her throughout the series because we see the effects of his parenting slowly seep into her adult life, making her socially awkward, emotionally repressive, mentally unstable, and horny? Sometimes. The constant theme of familial bonding and the lack of one leading to generational trauma is really prominent in this series, especially in season 1, mostly for characters like Reagan and Brent. We'll get to him later. Like there's this episode later on in the season where Reagan goes into her past memories to defeat a killer robot that her dad created for her, only to find out her dad has been erasing some of her memories and literally removed her childhood best friend from her mind so she can partake in forced child labor and pursue a career in science. Like what? Why would you do that? Somebody kill... Can someone please kill this man? Oh my god. But her dad isn't all to blame because Reagan's worth ethic, ego, and oftentimes her own self-doubt interferes with her ability to naturally connect with her coworkers and other people. Like in this one episode, she literally created a robot version of her Tinder date, programmed him to be the ideal boyfriend for her, and somehow she still managed to fuck that up. Like damn. You really live like this? And just like her coworkers, almost all of them are sleazy, no good, absolutely disgusting, horrible people. Except for Brent. Brent's cool, we love him. But despite most of them being bottom of the barrel people, I love them all, which is really hard to pull off. Reagan's coworkers, Gigi, Andre, Mike, Glenn, and her boss JR are all extremely likable to me in their own ways. Not by just having an equally distributed amount of screen time, but by actually being living, breathable characters outside of their preconceived archetypes. JR is the slightly uptight, morally ambiguous boss of Cognito Inc. that somehow manages to get himself out of trouble that he most likely caused every other episode. Glenn, a right-wing conservative, half-human, half-dolphin hybrid, which is a sentence I never thought I'd need to say. Andre, the horny drughead who probably has every STD in the world. Mike, the horny drughead who also probably has every STD in the world. He's also a sentient mushroom. And Gigi, who is like a social media manager, but for like the entire world. But what I like the most about them, outside of their individual personalities, is how they all play into the found family trope and bounce off each other. None of them truly feel left out of the dynamic unless the episode specifically wants them out of the equation. From helping Reagan to fake her own death to escape her crush, to gassing a whole town with dementia gas to keep them mentally stuck in the 80s forever, no matter how morally fucked up it may seem, these guys are all moving parts of the series. And it's not like the show has a serious plot or anything, it's mostly episodic. There's no long-term goal to obtain or big bad to take down, at least in the first half of the season, but it's more so about the characters and how they try to form an understanding of one another by bettering themselves. And that sense of personal connectivity is why I love this show so much. But in addition with the characters, this show is also fucking hilarious. This show utilizes a shit ton of references for its main core of humor, so if you don't understand a joke, that's probably why. From celebrities, popular conspiracies, old 80s shows, and more, honestly, I can see the jokes being a bit tiring for some because they are a bit overused in certain scenarios and sometimes they don't really stick the landing. Like in this one episode, Brent says, "Call me Jamiroquai because because this is virtual insanity." Such a stupid joke. Why did that make me laugh? Fortunately for me though, as someone who grew up in the early to mid 2000s and was raised entirely on media from the 80s and 90s because my family were a bunch of old heads. Thanks, Grandma.
No problem, baby.
I can confidently say that I understood at least 85% of the referential jokes. But those aren't the only jokes that are made in the series. There's many of cases where there are a lot of genuine forms of mature, gross out, or absurdist humor that are riddled throughout the series and leads to a ton of engaging sequences. And for me, I honestly think that's what the series does best. And that's all I really have to say about Inside Job. It's a fun series with a lot of heart, and it sucks that Netflix canned it right when the plot was starting to take off. So, yeah. Fuck Netflix. Okay, I'm going to be real for a second when I say that The Midnight Gospel is unironically one of the best animated shows I've ever seen in my entire life. Created by the GOAT himself, Pendleton Ward, and comedian Duncan Trussell, this is one of those shows that come into your life once every few years and then never again. And the way it ended was kinda bittersweet, but also, The Midnight Gospel follows this scrimsy little guy named Clancy, and you can kind of think of him as a intergalactic space hippie, and his main goal throughout the series is doing the simple task of simulating his mind into a artificially crafted avatar to venture across alternate universes, interviewing all kinds of people about literally anything for his space podcast consisting of one single viewer. And I don't know about you guys, but that's some real shit. And when I first went into this series, I honestly didn't know what to expect. There was barely anyone talking about it. No hype, no buzz, just a singular trailer that at the time barely had a few million views. So when I finally caved in to watch it, I was simply blown away. When you view The Midnight Gospel with fresh new eyes, the first thing you usually notice is the dialogue and how natural it sounds. It's not like in the Smiling Friends way where the voice actors just improvise for more human sounding dialogue to emulate a genuine conversation. But in this show, they genuinely have a conversation. Because this show is 75% based on a podcast, the Duncan Trussell Family Hour podcast to be exact, where the host Duncan and various guests come in to talk about literally whatever comes to their mind. Usually that of philosophy, human psychology, existentialism, classism, societal circumstance, the acceptance of life and death and what it means to us as humans who constantly experience it, and much, much more. The show really plays into the strengths of being partially a podcast by animating over the segments of the portions where these long, insightful conversations scenes take place, having them form a story around the dialogue itself, usually accompanied by the most absurd visuals you've ever seen that rarely match the subject matter of what's being talked about. Like for example, the first episode introduces Clancy, where he goes into this simulated universe where this zombie apocalypse is occurring and he meets like the president of the world or something, and the entire time as the world is crumbling around them, in the most nonchalant way imaginable, Clancy and the president are casually talking about the issues drugs have on society and people as a whole, their usage, their purpose, and how often we place our own sense of morality on said drugs rather than the people who sell, distribute, or take them. Or the episode when Clancy accidentally goes into a medieval-esque world and meets this character named Trudy, who is a warrior that set out on avenging her lover's death, and the whole episode is being about the concept of love and forgiveness, and how to find community with others after a sense of loss and loneliness. The Midnight Gospel really makes it feel as if the dialogue is directed towards the viewers themselves, while also feeling self-contained enough to tell its own coherent story. It's kind of like a form of animated therapy, and sometimes the subject matter doesn't really even have to do anything with Clancy or what he's dealing with in his life, but oftentimes Clancy uses the simulation device to escape his own reality, his issues, his doubts, his worries. Going into these worlds and interviewing others is what gives him a sense of relief. And while not always coming out satisfied, the act of escapism itself is sometimes enough for him. Which brings me to the show's defining episode of the season, Mouse of Silver, which is one of the hardest episode names I've heard in a while, by the way. Like, goddamn! This is the final episode of the season, and for the most part, I've ignored bringing up Clancy's past because the show displays it very briefly. Clancy is literally living in a van, he's in crazy debt, he constantly ignores his sister. His life is basically fucked up, but most importantly, his mom is dying of cancer, something Clancy didn't really want to face, until his mother showed up to his doorstep and had a serious conversation with him. And the entire episode is just this deep conversation about death and how to come to terms with it, whether it's possible to accept it, how to prepare for it, and how to get over the grief. Basically, how to live with death. And what really breaks me the most is that, like I've mentioned before, this is all based on a podcast. This isn't a portion of the story that they just added for the sake of it. Duncan Trussell actually sat down with his dying mother and had this conversation. He actually broke it down in the studio. Those tears were genuine, and I felt that throughout every bit of this episode. This is probably one of the best self-centered characters I've ever seen, period. But more importantly, this episode really teaches about the concept of acceptance, showing that sometimes there's no need to look for a greater purpose or higher power. Sometimes as people, we need to accept in order to become stronger, to truly form an understanding of what it means to say goodbye. That's a part of the human condition. That's a lived and shared experience that we all live and go through. We have to let ourselves know that pain and sadness is okay, that there's a sense of love in letting go, and that's exactly why we cry. But enough of depressing subject juice, because the Midnight Gospel is also pretty funny. The way it balances comedy, and while not trying too hard to be edgy, is an achievement in and of itself. While not as funny as The Inside Job in my opinion, I found myself laughing a good bit throughout the show. Chuckling, even. Not only that, but the visuals in this series are so stunning. Like, oh my goodness. Can we just bow our heads for a few seconds to take a moment of silence and appreciate how good this show looks? Let us bow. Its style is very simplistic, but its usage of colors is what elevates it so much more. With the animation being consistently fluid and trippy throughout its entire runtime, I get why so many people call it Adventure Time, but on LSD. But yeah, The Midnight Gospel is one of the shows of all time. There's quite literally nothing like it. Because just like me, I think you too will enjoy the gospel. It's honestly kind of crazy what happened to this show, because the entire series was pretty much dropped over the course of 2 weeks on Cartoon Network with zero promotion and then never to be seen again. Which is absolutely crazy, because this show was made by Cartoon Network Europe, with the exact team and creatives that made Gumball. Yeah, the one that argued with Dream that one time. I don't have too much to say about Elliott from Earth, but I did want to bring it to attention because I feel like there's not many people who've heard of this one. And this show made me realize something very, very important. that British people may actually be funny. So Elliott from Earth starts with this kid named, well, Elliott and his scientist mom that live in an RV, and by some mysterious means, they get abducted by this weird alien thing where they get transported across the galaxy. They meet this weird little dinosaur alien and name it Mo, and then go to space New York, and since they're basically stuck there, they pretty much have to stay there until they can find a way to get back home. It's a very simple story with a very simple setup. However, this show does feel extremely wholesome. It's a slight coming-of-age story for Elliott and Mo, with them learning how to open up and make friends. All the characters within this show are extremely lovable, and it makes for such a quick, fun watch. I love Elliott, I love Mo, I love their lesbian mom, I love their cartoonishly evil-looking teacher that looks like he came out of an 80s show, I love the lore. Everything about this show just screamed potential. But what gets me is the fact that unlike Gumball, you can tell from the very beginning that they were pushing for an actual narrative with this story. Midway throughout the season, it becomes slightly more episodic in nature, having Elliott and Mo do normal things like attend school, make friends, explore the city, kill their classmates, and eat yogurt. You know, normal kid stuff. But the first few and last few episodes show that they wanted to take the story in a certain direction, giving us just enough intrigue to keep us wondering, but not enough to where it would be satisfying just yet. Having all of these aliens across the galaxy in this space utopia, yet none of them know or have heard of Earth, is such a unique point of intrigue that if built upon properly would have amounted to a much better show. But then it just ends. Like right when we were going to get answers, the show just straight up ends. And this show came out in early 2021, by the way. It's now a few years later, and till this day, there hasn't been much of a peep from any signs of this show getting renewed for a second season. And while it hasn't officially been deemed as cancelled by any studio or company, I feel like it's safe to assume that Warner Bros. Is not interested in picking this show back up, which, you know, sucks. And if this video has taught me anything, it's that major corporations suck absolute donkey balls. And this show wasn't even on Netflix. I'm just doing it for the laughs at this point. And so, Dead End Paranormal Park is the only show on this list that I knew almost nothing about before going in. The only thing I knew about it was that people on Twitter were like angry because the MC was gay or trans or something, which is kind of a silly reason to be mad at a show for. But that kind of intrigued me even more, because if you know me, I'm all for that shit. Like, yes, give me more gay people. And after watching the show, it surprised me to find out how well they handled a handful of topics, including the aforementioned outwardly trans themes, which I don't really see many animated shows do that often. Dead End Paranormal Park starts with this guy named Barney and this girl named Norma. They're both shut-ins to a certain extent, but simultaneously apply for this job at a haunted theme park of this big-time pop star named Pauline. Once they are there, they meet a demon named Courtney who just wants to get home, and she tries to sacrifice both of them to this demon named Tamalukas. But somehow the demon possesses Barney's dog Pugsley, thus causing him to start talking and being able to casually use magic after they banish him into a photo? That's just the basic premise of episode 1, and from that point on, things just keep getting weirder and weirder for these guys. But that's not really what attached me to the show. What made me fall in love with this series so early on is its sense of maturity and normalcy. Like I mentioned earlier, this show tackles themes of isolation and acceptance with trans identity through one of our main characters, Barney. And what I love the most about his arc is that you can constantly feel the looming fear from him whenever he interacts with his family. Even if you aren't trans yourself, this show does a very good job at showcasing exactly why he justifiably feels and acts the way he does when faced with these scenarios. And there's this scene I love in season 1 where Barney is sitting down with his family for lunch, which is a relatively normal activity, but it's the most awkward exchange you could possibly imagine, because Barney feels that his family doesn't truly understand him. While his mom and dad are slightly accepting people, their acceptance feels more passive-aggressive, giving Barney constant excuses instead of just, you know, apologizing. And to Barney, that doesn't feel genuine. He doesn't want his parents to feel like they need to walk on eggshells when around him, because just like everyone else, he's human. He doesn't want acceptance, he just wants to feel normal. Just because he's experiencing change, it doesn't mean he's a different person, which is why he keeps his distance constantly and feels welcomed at the park with Norma and the others, because that's the only place where he feels like he can just be Barney. I also love what they did with Norma. Outside of her being my favorite character, I think the portrayal of anxiety within her is very important because I feel like a lot of people can personally relate to her. Norma's crippling anxiety not only affects how she functions in everyday life, but it's also a fear she constantly tries to overcome. Norma also hyperfixates on many things that often act as her escape from reality. And it's not something that's intentional on her part, it's just people in general are just scary. Overstimulating induced anxiety attacks are pretty frequent for her, and the show makes it very apparent how serious these can be while treating it with the respect it deserves. Being socially awkward and completely disregarding of social cues isn't just played off as some cartoony quirk that she just so happens to have, but this is an extensive part of who she is as a character and her arc of self-discovery and learning how to open up. And honestly, they're so real for that. I also love the other characters. Logs, Badia, Pugsley, and Courtney. They function as the side cast partially, but are a big reason for a lot of the growth seen between Barney and Norma. Logan and Barney's dynamic as these bumbling lovebirds too scared to ask each other out is honestly so charming, and their chemistry is just a complete mess. But it's cute seeing how they find themselves and adjust to their own individual quirks before eventually dating. Badia is pretty much just the nerd emoji of the bunch, and I absolutely love her for that. She also functions as a good mental and moral support for Norma and basically everyone else in the park. And Pugsley, while being comedic relief, oftentimes really has a deep sense of companionship with Barney, and funnily enough is the voice of reason when Barney says or does some kinda questionable things. And for Courtney, like every other show on this list, I highly recommend you watch the series in full to get the full experience, but for what it is, Paranormal Park is an important show for both kids, teens, and even adults. Its themes are ones that are easily digestible and will continue to be relevant for years to come. And I'm so excited to see where this show goes. Oh my god, come on! Okay, so this is the big one. Infinity Train will go down as probably the most universally fucked show to ever exist in Western media. Not only was the show canned prematurely and put on hiatus several times, but till this day, there is still no legal way to watch or support this show. So unfortunately, I had to become a Monkey D. Luffy for at least a week until I finished it. Hello, Editing Juice here. I had to record this part because after doing a bit more research, there is actually a way to officially watch the show through services like Apple TV or Amazon Prime, but you just have to purchase each part separately. It's kind of like the world's most expensive game of Where's Waldo, but by the time you purchase all the parts, you'll be at least $30 down and still be missing a few episodes because some of them are literally just not even on there. So you'll have like 1/3 of the actual show. So, yeah. Since Infinity Train is made up of 4 separate parts, or books, each part being with a slightly different set of cast or characters, I'm going to go over just the first part of the show, because I do plan on doing a full series retrospective video about Infinity Train later down the line, instead of trying to cram like 5 seasons worth of content into this little segment of the video, because I honestly have so much to say about it, and it would be a great disservice if I didn't express my full complete thoughts on the show. I mean, that and the fact that the script is already like 55% done, so like, you know, if you want to, you know, if you want to drop a like or subscribe, you know, you can just do that if you want. I mean, the subscribe button is sitting there, you know, all sexy like, and you know, we don't even have to rush into things or anything. We can just, you know, take our time, or you know, even go out to grab a bite to eat or get some coffee or something. What if I told you this entire part was about divorce? Yeah, I'm being dead serious. We're introduced to the first book of Infinity Train by looking into the life of 13-year-old Tulip. She's interested in game development and programming, but more importantly, like I've mentioned before, she slapped right in the middle of her parents' divorce. And as divorces go, they tend to affect the lives of not only the people initiating said divorce, but the child as well. And in terms of first episodes, I think Infinity Train probably has my favorite out of any series in this video, because the pacing of this show is extremely fast, only comprising of 10 11-minute long episodes. But I assure you, they make every single minute count. Tulip wants to go to programming camp, but due to her parents' absolute lack of proper scheduling skills, that didn't happen. So Tulip runs away and randomly stumbles across a train. An Infinity Train. Haha! Yeah, I'm sorry, that was horrible. When she steps into the train, this shit is absolutely bonkers. There's this talking robot named 11, this buildings blocks world, and this ugly ass dog mop booty hole fly looking thing. Like, what the hell even is that? Oh my god. There's also this glowing number on her hand that goes up or down for seemingly unknown reasons. And a core aspect of what I love about this show so far is that it balances mystery and intrigue along with slight horror and comedy extremely well. And that's mostly due to the concept of every passenger car being its own self-contained world for our protagonist to pass through. Each car has a vastly different theme than the last. There's the piano car, the corgi car, party animal car, chrome car, crystal car, and more that each feel oddly lived in, brought to life by the beautiful sound design and music. But outside of the ever-mysterious lore of the train, the characters are also a delight. One is this little half-and-half robot with a dual personality that Tulip ran into, and he serves as most of the comedic relief in the series. His constantly contradicting sides of optimism and pessimism is so fun to watch. Atticus, a cute dog Tulip ran into in the corgi car that vowed to help her on her journey after getting completely destroyed by this creature, and the cat. Yeah, we don't talk about the cat. But to me though, I think the core of it all is Tulip's journey for situational acceptance. In every car, despite their differences, we learn a bit more about Tulip as a character, how she views herself, her parents, her past, and her future. I especially love the cat's car and the chrome car for that very reason. The cat car is the episode about, of course, the cat. And I didn't mention this earlier, but the cat isn't really a trustworthy person. But when Tulip and friends wind up in the cat's car, the cat shows Tulip a tape. Somehow, this cat has a full collection of tapes imbued with the memories of various passengers on the Infinity Train. And in attempts to trap Tulip in her own memories, we get some much needed introspection on Tulip and how she feels leading up to that point. Due to her parents' divorce, Tulip feels as if she's the cause. She believes that deep down, she was at fault, blaming herself for something out of her control and beating herself up for not understanding the complexity of the situation. In her memories, she tries to gain closure within them by forcing a reality that she would feel comfortable in. Perfect parents, perfect world, perfect life. By attempting to mold the ideal parents for herself, the parents she believes she deserves. But she realizes that in doing so, that negates the existence of her family back home. That also carries on into the chrome car, where the entire car is, chrome, a mirror world where the reflections are partially sentient. And in this world, Tulip's reflection kinda hates her ass. Not just because she's stuck in an empty void world made of chrome, but because her reflection knows and feels all the things that either Tulip hates or is scared to acknowledge about herself. And I'm not going to spoil too much about Tulip and her reflection, but just know that she's going to be extremely important later down the line. But it's honestly moments like that that really made the show click for me. Another nice detail I love about the first book is its naming scheme. The book is titled The Perennial Child, which is not only thematic to Tulip's situation of being stuck on a seemingly infinite train, but it also has a double meaning in regards to her name being in relation to a flower and her entire character arc. The word perennial is not only the name of a plant that basically lives for years on end without seasonal changes, but it's also the concept of something lasting or existing for a seemingly infinite amount of time. Tulips are usually deemed as perennial plants, and often represent a lack of change, forgiveness, or condolences, a way of saying sorry either through a means of empathy or sympathy. And that perfectly aligns with Tulip's character arc and how she feels towards herself and her parents, and coming to terms with adapting the concept of inevitable change in her life. And I think that's absolutely genius. The creator of this show honestly needs I don't even know, Jeff Bezos' bank account and social security number or something. I don't know. I don't know. Just give them something. This man deserves a reward. Oh my god. But with that being said, that concludes this video. Every one of these shows has something special they brought to the medium, and it's such a shame to see them go so early in their run. It kinda hurts actually. But their impact on me, and hopefully you, will not be forgotten. This is Subject Juice. Thank you for watching. I love you. Oh yeah, and I almost forgot. Fuck Netflix.